Ready? Start. In support of her claim of bona fide requirement of the demise premises, the landlady in her deposition as AW1 has categorically stated that the tenant had shifted his residence from the premises finally to a new residence consisting of 2 rooms located at the backside of his dhaba AW5. The mother of the landlady corroborated her testimony. The rent controller and the appellate authority rejected the claim of requirement of the premises in dispute made by the landlady on flimsy and intangible ground, holding that the landlady was resident at Mohali, the place of her posting as a teacher in education board. It was the specific case of the landlady that she in fact was residing at Mohali in one room because of her employment as a government servant, and occasionally she used to visit Ludhiana to look after her mother. It was established by the landlady that she got the possession of the demised premises from the tenant when he had shifted to his new residence located at the backside of the dhaba. She could have immediately occupied the premises and started living along with her old mother therein. It is her evidence that had she got the vacant possession of the premises, she would have commuted from Ludhiana to Chandigarh to attend her official duties, as the distance between these two places is neither far off nor time consuming. The tenant could not rebut and controvert the acceptable evidence of the landlady on any material aspect. On the contrary, it finds stated in paragraph 10 of the order of the rent controller that the tenant and his brothers, who appeared as RW7 and RW8 respectively, have admitted the said statement of landlady. The rent controller and the appellate authority rejected the claim of the landlady on the point of bona fide requirement on the other ground, holding that the mother of the landlady is the owner of one more house at Ludhiana, which was in occupation of the brother of the mother of the landlady, and the house could be shared by the landlady and her mother. During the course of the hearing of this appeal, the landlady has admitted before this court that she has since retired from the government service and presently she is residing with her sister at Chandigarh, and now she intends to reside in her own house at Ludhiana. It has been proved by the landlady that her mother, being an old woman, has to be looked after by her in her house at Ludhiana. The evidence led by the landlady clearly proves that the tenant had stopped living in the demised premises, and as noticed above, he had shifted to his new residence located at the back of his dhaba. The landlady categorically stated in her statement that a house owned by her parents located is unfit and unsafe for habitation of landlady and her aged ailing mother. Ready? Start. Mr. Raj Malhotra, learned senior counsel appearing on behalf of the appellant, would submit that the division bench of the High Court committed a serious error in passing the impugned judgment insofar as it failed to take into consideration the importance of holding a physical test before preparation of the select list. The learned counsel urged that arbitration on the part of the selection committee is apparent from the fact that the order of holding was pushed to the background. It was furthermore submitted that the division bench of the High Court did not assign sufficient and cogent reasons for interfering with the well-considered judgment of the learned single judge and proceeded to modify the same without any application of mind. Our attention was moreover drawn to the fact that the purported reasons for modification, which were enumerated in paragraph 12 of the impugned judgment, really contain the statement of facts, and thus the same is wholly unsustainable. Mr. P.K. Goswami, learned senior counsel appearing on behalf of the private respondents, on the other hand, would contend that the appellant in the facts and circumstances of this case must be held to be stopped and precluded from raising any contention with regard to the validity or otherwise of the procedure for selection adopted by the selection committee, as he had participated in the selection process without any demur whatsoever. It is stated that pursuant thereto and in furtherance thereof, only the said respondent had been appointed and had been working since then. Our attention was furthermore drawn to the fact that against the order of the learned single judge, a writ appeal had been filed by him, which is pending. Indisputably, in the advertisement, the candidates were required not only to qualify in the written test but also the physical ability test. A plain reading of the advertisement clearly goes to show that the interview was to be continued only after holding of the said two tests. In tune with the said requirements, only the candidates were asked to appear in the written test on 26/4/1998 and in the physical test on 28/4/1998. There cannot, however, be any doubt whatsoever that a selection committee in a given situation may lay down a procedure for the purpose of shortlisting the candidates, but that does not mean that for the said purpose the order of holding a requisite test would be changed. In terms of a decision which was taken on 7/4/1999, the selection committee, though to take interview prior to holding of the physical ability test. Physical ability test keeping in view the nature of the job required to be performed by the candidates was an extremely important one. Passing in the physical ability test in a sine qua non for selection of the candidates in the post of sub-inspector of police. It was indeed a competitive test and the merit list should have been prepared not only on the basis of the written test and interview but also the physical ability test. Ready? Start. The petitioner filed a suit for a specific performance of an alleged agreement on sale dated 15/7/2003. The trial court dismissed the suit by judgment and decree dated 19/5/2008. The High Court dismissed the petitioner's appeal. Both the courts held that the petitioner had not approached the court with clean hands and that he had failed to prove any concluded contract for sale. High Court found that the defendant in the suit were also not above board in their conduct. It found that both sides were guilty of having lied on oath and deserved to be prosecuted. On the ground that courts were overburdened with litigation, the High Court decided that instead of directing prosecution, heavy costs should be levied on both petitioner and respondents to be paid to the state which spends money on providing the judicial infrastructure. I then proceeded to impose exemplary cost of rupees 10000 on the petitioner and rupees 10000 on the respondents, and directed that the costs should be deposited with the Delhi High Court Legal Services Committee. Feeling aggrieved by the dismissal of his appeal, the petitioner is before this court. On merits, we find that the concurrent findings of the trial court and the High Court do not warrant interference, and therefore this is not a fit case for grant of leave. The learned counsel for the petitioner submitted that levying cost of rupees 1 lakh against the petitioner was not warranted. He submitted that as the appeal before the trial court arose out of a civil suit, costs were governed by sections 35 and 35A of the Code of Civil Procedure and cannot exceed what is leviable under those provisions. Under section 35 of the code, award of cost is discretionary but subject to the conditions and limitations as may be prescribed and the provisions of any law for the time being in force. Under section 35A, cost of vexatious claims and defences may not exceed to rupees 3000 Further, the primary object of levying cost under section 35 and 35A of the code is to a litigant for the expense incurred by him in litigation to vindicate or defend his right. It is therefore payable by a losing litigant to his successful opponent when an appellant or a plaintiff has already paid the prescribed court fee in regard to the appeal or suit to the state at the time of institution. It is debatable whether any cost can be awarded to the state by way of penalty in a litigation between two private parties. One view has been that the provisions of sections 35 and 35A of the code do not in any way affect the wide discretion vested in by High Court in exercise of its inherent power to award cost in the interest of justice in appropriate civil cases. The more sound view, however, is that though award of cost is within the discretion of the court, it is subject to such conditions and limitations as may be prescribed and subject to the provisions of any law for the time being in force. Ready? Start. The Honorable Supreme Court considered the issue at length and held that ordinarily it is considered desirable not to restrict the delinquent's right to be represented by counsel or an agent of his choice, but it is different thing to say that such a right is an element of the principles of natural justice and denial thereof would invalidate the inquiry. The right to be represented by counsel or agent can be restricted, controlled or regulated by statutes, rules, regulations or standing orders. A delinquent has no right to be represented through counsel or agent unless the law specifically confers such a right upon him. The requirement of rules of industrial dispute insofar as the right of hearing of the delinquent is concerned cannot and does not extend to a delinquent to be represented though counsel or agent. The Honorable Apex Court held that refusal to grant the help of a lawyer is to be examined on the touchstone of the doctrine of prejudice, and it cannot be claimed in contravention to the statutory rules. The Honorable Apex Court further held that in a domestic inquiry, reasonable opportunity should be given to the delinquent employee to meet the charge framed against him, and it is desirable that in such an inquiry employee should be given liberty to be represented by a person of his choice if there is standing order against such a course being adopted, and if there is nothing otherwise objectionable in the request made by him. But in a case where the standing order of the employer company provides that in domestic inquiry only a representative of a union which is registered under the Trade Unions Act and is recognized by the Company Act. There can be no denial of natural justice if the request of the workman who insisted to be assisted by a representative of his own unrecognized union with the object of indirectly obtaining recognition to their union is rejected. A similar issue was considered and it was held that right to be represented by an advocate in the departmental proceeding can be restricted and regulated by the statute or by the service rules, including the standing orders applicable to the employee concerned. A similar view has been reiterated in Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited versus Maharashtra General Kamgar Union 1999 1 SCC 626. In view of the aforesaid settled legal propositions, it is not necessary that in every case the assistance of defense nominee is necessarily permitted. It depends upon the facts of an individual cases. However, such facility is required to be given where on assessing situational facts the authority comes to the conclusion that the delinquent was likely to be in a comparatively disadvantageous position if such facility is not provided for and it would prejudice his case. More so, such an assistance cannot be claimed as a matter of right nor in contravention of the statutory provisions or standing orders applicable to the employee is there. Ready? Start. Sri Gupta further argued that in the present case what was prayed for was a writ of quo warranto, and in fact the election of the appellant was not called in question. It was argued that since the writ petitioner came to know about the appellant not belonging to the scheduled caste and since the post of the chairperson was reserved only for the scheduled caste, therefore the High Court was justified in entering into that question as to whether he really belongs to scheduled caste. In short, the learned counsel argued that independent of the election of the appellant as a ward member or as a chairperson, his caste itself was questioned in the writ petition only with the objective to see whether he could continue as the chairperson. This argument is clearly incorrect as the continuance of the appellant as the chairperson was not dependent upon something which was posterior to the appellant's election as chairperson. It is not as if some event had taken place after the election of the appellant which created a disqualification to continue as the chairperson. The continuance of the appellant as the chairperson depended directly on his election, which election was available only to the person belonging to the scheduled caste. It is an admitted position that ward number 8 was reserved for scheduled caste, and so also the post of chairperson. Therefore, though indirectly warded, what was in the challenge in reality was the validity of the election of the appellant. According to the writ petitioner, the appellant could not have been elected as a ward member, nor could be elected as the chairperson, as he did not belong to the scheduled caste. We can understand the eventuality where a person who is elected as a scheduled caste candidate, his caste after the elections by conversion to some other religion, then a valid writ petition for quo warranto could certainly lie, because then it is not the election of such person which would be in challenge, but his subsequently continuing in his capacity as a person belonging to a particular caste. The counsel for the appellant rightly urged that the question of caste and the election are so inextricably connected that they cannot be separated. Therefore, when the writ petitioner challenged the continuation of the appellant on the ground that he is not belonging to a particular caste, what they in fact challenged is the validity of the election of the appellant, though apparently the petition is for the writ of quo warranto. Again, merely because the appellant was described as being a Christian in the service records did not mean that the appellant was actually a person professing Christian religion. It was not, after all, known as to who had given those details, and further as to whether the details in reality were truthful or not. It would be unnecessary for us to go into the aspect whether the petitioner is reality is a Christian, for the simple reason that this issue was never raised at the time of his election. Stop.